Internet music fan orthodoxy tells me that I'm supposed to hate everything Pitchfork does or constantly complain about it. And I don't know. I like some of the things Pitchfork does. In particular, their Perfect 10 series. If you've never seen it, it's on Instagram. It might be on YouTube too, I don't know. And it's this idea where they take an artist and they ask them what album is a perfect 10. Like what for you is a perfect album. Now at its worst, much like the site itself, it's hipsters trying to be cool. It's musicians trying to say something that'll make other musicians go, ooh. But at its best, it's a very cool insight into what an artist is thinking. In particular, what an artist is thinking at the time that they give the answer. Because I think for most artists, when you ask them this question, they'll tell you one thing one time and another thing another time. So Geordie Greep, the artist who I'm reviewing, I'm not actually reviewing Pitchfork, I'm reviewing Geordie Greep and the album The New Sound. When he was asked recently, I was sitting there and I was expecting what I was expecting because I grew up listening to Frank Zappa, so I was expecting, what are these Frank Zappa CDs? I don't know, maybe an early one, a late one, a bootleg, who knows what kind of cool Zappa kind of deal he's gonna come up with. But he doesn't. He says some jazz album by Dale Jarrett or Keith Jarrett, the only jazz artist who is the father of a famous NASCAR driver. And I was just I don't know. What does that mean? And I just kind of clicked off it. I didn't really pay attention to it. Now, the only thing more useless than Pitchfork, obviously, are publicists and press releases. And yet, when you read the press release for this album, The New Sound by Geordie Greep, he returns to the Keith Jarrett question. He says, my plan is to do a Keith Jarrett thing. This is him describing his future as a musician. My plan is to do a Keith Jarrett thing. Have a different group of session musicians in a different place and lean into the fact that we're not going to get it the same. He goes on to talk about how he has over 30 musicians and a lot of it was done in Brazil and all that. So, okay, it turns out this Keith Jarrett fellow might actually be important to understanding this album. So I went down to Record Archive in Rochester, New York. They don't sponsor me, but I still publicize them. And I went looking for the Geordie Greep album. Didn't find it. Looked for the Smile album. Didn't find it. But most importantly, I found the Keith Jarrett album. And this is where I want to start this review. I want to start this review by talking about this Keith Jarrett album that Geordie Greep, when asked, when promoting The New Sound, he says is the best album. The most perfect album. Now, great musicians and great music, in my opinion, push your feeling as to what is good music. You hear something and you go, I don't know if that's good music. I don't think I like that. And then you sort of listen to it some more and you find the nuances and you find the subtlety. Sometimes they do that by the way that they make the music. Think of the Beatles introducing Indian music to the world outside of India. Think of Radiohead introducing electronica outside of electronica. Okay, think of all the different things think of Kanye West introducing gospel to people outside of gospel. Music, they can do it, but also they can point you the way. They can say, hey, listen to this. This is great. So listening to this album has really pushed my conception of what I like in music. It's got that soprano saxophone thing. I grew up with a guy called Kenny G, who was all over the place, kind of soft jazz. If you played this for me at any point without telling me that some artist I really loved listened to it, I'd say, please turn it off. Please turn it off because it's just not cool enough. It's just too cheesy. But what happens when you listen to it really carefully, especially when you listen to it with the idea that somebody you know and trust artistically, I don't know him personally, I did meet him once, but I don't know him, you just listen differently and you listen carefully. And that's the thing. You know what? He's right. This album is a perfect 10. It's so gorgeous. It's so gorgeous. What I did, and I encourage you to do this, every time I'd listen to The New Sound, I would then listen to My Song by Keith Jarrett. I would alternate them, one on, one off, one on, one off. And I started to sort of see it all together. At the very least, I'd say, and I don't mean to be this guy, but I'm going to be this guy. You don't really love the new Geordie Greep album if you don't listen to My Song as well. I'm not saying you don't like it, but I'm saying if you really want to try to understand it, if you really want to love Geordie Greep's music and this album, I think you really have to love that album too. Thank you for auditing the Always Positive New Music Review Show, hosted by a French professor who's been so excited to record this video, I've literally been waiting for the sun to rise. That's where I am right now. I've got my baby monitor. I have a 2-year-old who might wake up at any time. And if she does, then I'm just gonna have to do a part 2 of the video. Don't worry, I'll include a link to it. I think I'll probably get it all done though. So let's talk about this Keith Jarrett album. And in particular, let's talk about it while imagining this. I think when artists talk about artists that they really love, what they're really doing is they're projecting their wishes for their own art. It's like you talk, like if you ever hear me talk about a great music critic, or hear me talk about a great academic or a great teacher, I describe what they do, but in describing what they're doing, I try to describe like what I wish I was doing. I was trying to think, what's like the best piece of music criticism on YouTube? Probably All My Friends Hate Skrillex by Tempa on Toast. It's an amazing piece. And if I were to try to describe to you what makes it so great, the weaving of intellectual research with contextualization of the time, with personal anecdote, like if I was trying to describe all the things that made that a great review and just a great video essay, I would be telling you the things that I want. So let's go, let's quote. I wrote out all of Geordie Greep's answer as to why he calls this 1978. Why he calls this 1970, actually 77 album. He got it wrong, but recorded it in 77, released it in 78. Actually. Let's see, why does he think my song is so perfect? And let's use that as a way. And let's see, does this describe the new sound by Geordie Greep? It's an album made in 1978 with the Scandinavian Quartet, with amazing musicians. Now, on first blush, that doesn't sound similar, except it is similar, because what Geordie Greep is fascinated with is traveling and working with different musicians, working with different session musicians and seeing what comes out, going to another country. Now, Scandinavia is not the same thing as Brazil, but for an American like Keith Jarrett, going to Scandinavia is fairly complicated and is a very long, very far away. Okay, so off the bat, we sort of get this idea. Oh, he might have been inspired by that idea. I'm not going to try and do a Geordie Greep accent, by the way, because I don't know how to imitate the accent of someone who comes from nowhere. I know he comes from Walthamshire. Walthamshire? Walthamtown? Somewhere Walthamy, outside of London. But does he have a real... Is his accent the way he talks? Or is that like a thing he made up? I can't tell. All right. It's a great album from beginning. From the very first note, it's got incredible atmosphere. If Record Archive had the new sound by Geordie Greep, I'd hold that up and say, that's true for that as well, right? So just pretend I have it in my hand. You know what? Here, well, this is yellow. We'll pretend this is it, okay? Yes, absolutely. It has amazing atmosphere, a very consistent atmosphere. Now, this is very breezy, somewhat almost like nostalgically sweet, whereas this is campy torch songs of unsettling, exotic, and pathetic. I'll get into what this album's really about. Geordie Greep continues. Amazing tunes, bizarre tunes that are really kind of obtuse, but very melodic. You're trying to tell me Geordie Greep does not want to make music that is amazing, bizarre, kind of obtuse, and very melodic? Check, 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 and check. Kind of always on the edge of being very cheesy, but really intense and as well and uncompromising. That's the thing, that when I listen to Geordie Greep, at times I go, whoa, 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 that was kind of cheesy. And when you listen to this album, you're going to go, oh, whoa, 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 that's kind of cheesy. But that's where you have to understand it's that uncompromising bit. It's the fact that it's on the edge, but it's intense and uncompromising. And in reality, that cheesiness, whether or not you like it, that's someone who says they're not worried about being cool. They're not worried about making sounds that you think are the sounds that are cool. They're going to make sounds that they think are cool. And if you think it's cheesy, by the time you're done listening to this album 4 or 5 times, you're going to say, this is not cheesy. This is the most beautifully transcendent piece of music I've ever heard. And same thing when you listen to the new sound by Geordie Greep. You might hear some sounds, you might hear some choices, mixtures, and just go, ugh. And more on the cheesiness later. So maybe you're interested and you want to know more about Keith Jarrett. I didn't know much about him. I was joking about the NASCAR thing. I know he's not Dale Jarrett's dad. Number 88, UPS car, drove a Ford. I do know a little bit about NASCAR. You don't, so you could think I'm making it up. I'm not. I've had a fun life. But this is the thing you can do. Just use YouTube, okay? I'll include a link in the description. Just inform yourself a little bit. There's a really great documentary about his jazz improvisational style. It's like an hour-long video. There's an amazing movie of him made in the late 60s, and when you watch it, you just go, please, dear God, can there be a Keith Jarrett biopic starring Eric Andre? That's just what you want. I don't think Keith Jarrett's black, but I don't think it really matters because they bear a similar resistance and they just this sort of feeling. And that's why I hate billionaires. I hate billionaires because billionaires don't take their money to make Keith Jarrett biopics starring Eric Andre. You know, if billionaires were cool, they'd stop buying yachts and they'd start doing amazing things, just giving artists all this money to do whatever the hell they want. I'm going off on a sidetrack here. But really the best video that I found on Keith Jarrett is by my Western New York brethren in the YouTube sphere, Rick Beato. So Rick Beato did this interview where he explains who Keith Jarrett is. He gives a little introduction for people like us who don't really know who he is. And he just gives this interview that's so touching and so moving. It is really Rick Beato at his absolute best. Like you know, sometimes you see people who are really popular and then you sort of forget why they're so great. I actually did an essay, sort of like a vlog on my Patreon, all about the Flanderization of Beato, about how he's getting sort of encouraged by the algorithm to just get more and more in this sort of negative space about music and about why music is bad now. Well, when you see something like this, when you see his interview with Keith Jarrett, you just go, oh, right, yeah, go ahead and get whatever kind of clicks you need to do, because whatever it takes to make pieces of journalism, essays, appreciation, criticism, this is what it should be. But speaking of that, let's segue. As my other YouTube colleague would say, let's transition to something else Beato said. So one of the essays that he put out, one of the videos he put out that got a lot of clicks for being negative, is this thesis on bands. Why are there no bands in the top 10 anymore? Watch my The Smile review where I go more into that. But it's pertinent to this question because we obviously have a band that broke up. We have Black Midi that broke up, and we have Geordie Greep who's making a solo album. And, you know, sometimes it's a question of money, and that might be it. But I don't think it's really that. And in the essay that Beato made, or the video that Beato made, he talked about the fact that, like, modern music is sort of a lie in the way that it presents itself. So solo artists actually quite often have a consistent producer behind them who is making all of the music. And I've talked about that before. Like, in my opinion, Billie Eilish is a band, and that band is Billie Eilish and Phineas. Everyone loves Chappell Roan, but Chappell Roan is a band. It just happens to be with Daniel Nigro. And Taylor Swift, every album is a band with someone new. But what ends up happening is solo artists are up front and then they hide the band. That's what's happened over time. And this is not that. That is not what Geordie Greep is doing. This is really a question of control. It's a question of vision, and it's a question of control. And it's kind of weird because if you're a fan of Black Midi, the drummer, Morgan Simpson, is on, I don't know, 3-4 tracks on this album, you know? And like, okay, that's kind of weird. Now Cameron Picton is not, and I guess he had a solo set at the Windmill recently. He's doing his own thing. But what's interesting is that even though this album by Geordie Greep does not sound, on first blush, it is not as radically different from Black Midi to the point where you'd go, wow, they absolutely needed to break up. But it's very clear that they did. They did need to break up, and I'm going to be quoting from that press release with Geordie Greep here. Music can be so much more than learning to play the same as everybody else. It can be anything you want. With the recording of the new sound, it was the first time I had no one to answer to. Side note, I had no one to answer to. Being in a band, Black Midi, we often had this we can do everything feeling, but you also are kind of limited in that approach. And sometimes it's good to do something else, to let go of things. So that's really what it is. I imagine that his working relationship with his band is good. I imagine that he likes his band. I imagine he's not in hell. But Keith Jarrett didn't work with the same quartet for his whole career. And let's be honest. Let's bring back the person who I started this with. You know, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention was not who he worked with forever. He worked with different drummers. He worked with different guitarists. He worked with different people depending on where he was, depending on what he was doing. It's still very Zappa-y. That's actually how I feel this album is. It's him moving towards being more of a truly Zappa-like figure. Sort of commanding, expansive consumer of genres and styles and musicians who exhibit precision and perfection, but also soul and spirit. That's what I'm picturing here with where Geordie Greep is going. And Frank Zappa could, as much as I like his stuff with the Mothers of Invention, I actually don't like a lot of his later stuff because of the way that it sounds, because I don't like the musicians that he picks as much. But still, I think that's who he has to be. So that's about the music. What about the words? I'm still getting over my bronchitis, so if you hear me cough, just type in the comments, feel better. What is this album about? Well, it's basically a concept album. I think with the slight cheesiness that I talk about from time to time, it can feel like a musical at times. And I want to first tell you what my 16-year-old daughter thought of this album. So we were listening to it. I was driving her to a corn maze, drove through Fairport, New York, birthplace of Rick Beato, hometown. And I was, while we were driving, we were listening to this album. And, it's great music. She loves great music, great drumming, all that stuff. But then, while we're talking, there'll be like a little moment of silence. And then there'll be like a word that pops out. I disembowel myself just to hold your hand. And then like the music would come back on. I can come buckets and buckets like stallions. All these things would happen. And eventually, after a little bit of time, she's like, Dad, I think I can sing a song from this album. And this is what she sang. Castrating a 90-year-old man with a spork, then French kissing a donkey. That's how the album sounds when you're not paying attention. Now, I told her it's much deeper than that, and I want to talk to you about what this album's about, in my opinion, okay? I see it as a musical. I call it an incel musical, but as we'll see, I actually call it a pre-incel musical. I have an idea of, there's like a single person that this album is about, but that single person is like, it's like Link from Zelda. It's like the same character that's born in different timelines and born in different times, but instead of being a courageous hero, it's a pathetic man. It's a very pathetic man who feels very small and wants to feel big. This pathetic man often feels small because of a perceived or real sexual inadequacy. He is desperately horny and completely incapable of knowing how to relate to women as human beings at all. I call him Incel Andy. I get the sense maybe he's called Bongo in the sort of Greepiverse. I'm not quite sure, but I like calling him Incel Andy. I like to call him Andy after Andrew Tate, who's the king of these kinds of pathetic nerds, because he is one, right? Like the desperately horny people don't know how to relate. Just that ends up. But anyway, so Incel Andy. But this is the thing. Why do I like this album so much? I think it's important because I imagine a lot of the audience who's listening to this are young men who have a hard time feeling at ease with themselves, who feel difficulty speaking with women as human beings, who have a hard time approaching women, who feel inadequate. And I imagine that this is the kind of music that speaks to people like that. But the problem is, the now of it is that we have the internet. The internet screws everything up. The internet took all of the incel thoughts that anyone could possibly have and weaponized them and concentrated them and made them worse. I think this album is pre-internet. This album is about the core feelings that lead to being an incel. In case you don't know, incel is a term that means involuntary celibate. It is a term that was developed basically in the men's rights activist movement sphere, what's called the manosphere, of men who try to take over, like the fact that they don't get attention from women, they make it part of their personality, and they try to explain why it is proof that women are weak and stupid, and why they actually should be with the women. It's a very complicated thing. I invite you to look it up if you want to learn more about why the world sucks right now. But I feel like this album is not really about that. It's the ghost of Keith Jarrett. Jeez. I'll put that there, make sure that doesn't happen again. It's those feelings, not the current reality. So what I want to do is, I made you a slideshow, okay? I made you a slideshow about this album, and I want to take you through the sort of different forms that this character has taken, okay? That this incel Andy has taken before the internet, okay? So let's go through. All right, let's go through my little slideshow here. I really should have cleaned off my screen, but there you go. Now, I think a lot of it starts with the concept of courtly love. This was a medieval concept of love in which a knight glorified and deified the object of his affection, who was a woman of high standing. Usually she was married, usually they fell in love at first sight, or he fell in love with her at first sight. And the idea was basically this: if he was just dedicated enough, if he wrote good enough poetry, if he was strong enough in war, then he would win her affection. At the basis is this: I'm a strong man, I get the woman. That's the thesis. That's, okay, it's more complicated than that, but this took the belief. I'm a strong man, I get the woman. I'm a big man, I get the woman. I'm not a small man. I'm not a small little man. I'm a big man, I get the woman. But what's implied in this, and this historically patriarchal system, is that women are obviously just objects to be won, and it is a part of patriarchy in keeping women down. But it also keeps men down, because it sold us the idea that if we are big enough, then we get to have what we want. But it's more than just what we want, because what we also have is the sex urge, the male sex urge, which I'm going to be talking about a lot on this channel. Does that make you uncomfortable? It is going to be a rough next 5 minutes. You might want to skip ahead till I put the slideshow down, because we're going to be doing a lot of sex urge talking, okay? But it's a real thing. Now, I want to take it many centuries later to who I think is the sort of the first king of the incels in this way, Vincent van Gogh. So if you don't know, Vincent van Gogh, great artist, Dutch, worked in France. And he wrote a lot about his difficulty with women. You know, his brother got married and was happy, and he was happy about that, but he felt very alienated from women. He lost his virginity to a prostitute in England, and he very famously cut off his ear. Now, do you know what he did? He cut off his ear and he gave it to his favorite prostitute, because in general, he didn't really have time or understand relationships. He wanted to dedicate time to his art, and then when he needed to get that sexual urge taken care of, when he needed to get the poison out, he would go and see a prostitute. So this kind of romantic image of this guy, this guy right here, he's not that far. He's not that far from the modern incel, even though he's this great artist. It's a really good thing he didn't have the internet, because he might go on there and start writing long diatribes. Why does my brother have a wife and I don't? I'm a great artist, and I love my brother, but he's not alpha like me, right? I'm a total sigma. Look at me. I'm Vincent van Gogh, right? That's what he might say. That's not how he spoke, though. It's neither a Dutch nor a French nor a Greep accent. So, we're talking 1880s here, the late 19th century, and also the same time that I would say he is a great predecessor to the incels. It's important that he found relief with sex workers, and that he had what we now call simping, right? Which is where you give too much attention and care to a woman who does not respond to you, right? Where you sort of put yourself out there, and it's sort of like a desperate spiral where you think the kinder you are, the more that you give her, the more likely she is to respond with her sexual and emotional favor, when in reality it's the opposite. Him giving the ear is like, ugh. Let's take things forward to another artist who I think is very, very close to this space and this album, Robert Crumb. Robert Crumb is like the king of indie artists, of indie comic book artists of the late 60s, 70s, 80s. He's still alive, I believe. A great movie about him made by Terry Zwigoff. And, he really is... So when you read his stuff, it's hard. It's very hard now, especially in the modern context, because it's really gross and it's really pervy, like just putting staples through penises, or like this cover right there, that's the way that he feels. Like, he feels like a loser. He feels like he can't see anybody, but when he draws, when he makes art, when he plays guitar, when he draws, then he feels like he's a big man, and he can draw these images. And the way that he describes visually, the way that he describes sex visually is just so uncomfortable, and it's just so clear how uncomfortable he is around women and around the sex act and how much he wants it, but they're these gigantic thighed monsters that he could barely even approach. I feel a lot of Robert Crumb energy in this music, and in I think, and I don't know Geordie Greep the man. I met him once, but I don't know him. I imagine that he relates to these feelings. I imagine he does not act on them. I imagine he's a good person with a good moral compass, but I imagine that he can really relate to these feelings that I'm describing here, which is why I think he describes them so well, because I think they're coming from a personal place. And of course, Frank Zappa. You got to have some Frank Zappa in there. You know, you ever hear the song Penis Dimension? Oh my, we're talking 1971. Hiya, friends. Now just be honest about it. Did you ever consider the possibility that your penis, and in the case of many dignified ladies, that the size of the titties themselves might provide elements of subconscious tension? Weird, twisted anxieties that could force a human being to have to become a politician, a policeman, a Jesuit monk, a rock and roll guitar player, a wino, you name it. Or in the case of the ladies, the ones that can't afford a silicone beef-up may become writers of hot books. Manuel, the gardener, placed his burning phallus in her quivering quim. Zappa was very, very, very horny, which is very confusing to me because I grew up during the late 1980s listening to gangster rap, thinking I would scandalize my parents, and then their favorite musician was Frank Zappa. And I'd listen to it, I go, turn it off, I don't want to listen to this with my dad, I don't want to listen to this with my mom, okay? But he also was very much in touch with that, and this is the thing, it's not inherently bad. These very powerful sexual urges are not inherently bad. It's just that a lot of men don't know what to do with them, and they can turn into something bad. And a lot of these artists, I think, are channeling this energy and describing it. And the problem is, in our modern day, it's hard to describe that energy without being accused of supporting it, right? Robert Crumb is I'm not saying he's canceled. He might be for his actual actions. I don't know. But it wouldn't fly now because we live in a better time where we're sort of reveling in this kind of baseness that has at its root a fair amount of sexism. You know, like there's sexism mixed in with the natural urges, and that's the problem. The natural urges need to be described and quantified and expressed artistically, but then the sexism that is associated with them needs to be taken out. It's very complicated. You know, I think Louis C.K. is really in there as well. You know, the way that he jokes about his own urges. You know, his most famous, to me, his most famous joke about how the thoughts that goes through his mind when he meets a woman. And I think that he very much is a great describer in this pre-incel phase. Incels before the term incels existed. But I think the absolute king of it has to be Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. I picture Incel Andy in this album as being a very Travis Bickle-like figure. Now, that's him as sort of a romantic hero. He's, of course, also seen quite often as a kind of badass hero, as a sort of fantasy that men can be. But the reality of it is, this is the fantasy, the power trip. But you really want to see what I think is the best image of Travis Bickle, especially in the concept of this album. I want you to have this image stuck in your head when you listen to this album, because this is, I think, the bongo of it all, the Incel Andy, the Geordie Greep image from Taxi Driver. Right there. He's in a porno theater, and he's watching pornography, and he's like, why is he covering his eyes? Does he know that it's wrong to be seeing it? Does he not know how to handle it? Is he not really able to see it? And I want to tie this together with a quote about the album that I found from Geordie Greep. That's the true desperation of these guys who have no other option, he continued. I find that very appealing in a way. I wanted to make this album where you listen to these songs and you're in the same sentence repulsed, amused, and sympathetic. It's all three vying for the main response, like a horror movie where you want to look away, but you want to look at the same time. I think that's how we're supposed to feel with these characters, with the Greep character, with the Incel Andy, with Mr. Bongo in here. And you know, this is what makes Taxi Driver so fascinating, is that he's not a bad guy in general, but he doesn't know what to do. So he actually gets a date, and he takes a date to a porno theater, and she obviously is not very happy with it. So it makes sense that prostitution is so important in all of these stories that I'm telling you. The prostitution is so important in the Van Gogh story. The prostitution is so important in Taxi Driver. Prostitution is the main story in The New Sound. This is why he would end up becoming fascinated with Jodie Foster's underage, but I don't think, the fact she's underage, I don't think It's not the point. It's her destroyed innocence. That's the point. Why he becomes fascinated with the prostitute played by Jodie Foster in the movie. Now, when we're talking about all this, like, do you sort of see where I'm going with this? I hope I haven't lost you here. I'm not just describing famous perverts. That's not the point. It's that many men, if not all, have a very deep and dark, perverted sexual urge within themselves, and some of them know how to socialize and figure it out and start families and be happy men who can be okay. Others don't. In the current stage, for those who don't, there is an outlet, which is the manosphere, which is very dangerous. But before then, there wasn't really. And you might end up not knowing what to do, and you might end up falling in love with the character, and you might end up trying to shoot the president, as John Hinckley did. John Hinckley, who tried to kill President Reagan because he was trying to impress Jodie Foster from the movie. He was such a Taxi Driver fan that he became the Taxi Driver, okay? That's why I made this image, this whole idea of prostitution. I made this image of Pretty Woman where I replaced Richard Gere's face with Geordie Greep, because I think that's the other fantasy. Pretty Woman's a 1990 movie. Who directed it? Was it Levinson? No, I forget. And it's this comedy about a very, very rich, powerful big man. Not a small man, a big man. Big man. Richard Gere, Mr. Sexy, sexiest man alive. And he has a high-class prostitute and falls in love with her. And he shows her all the beautiful things in life, takes her out of her life, and they fall in love, and it's this happy love story. In the movie, the book, it's not. Interesting difference there. Listen to You Must Remember This, the podcast by... anyways, it's very good podcasting. Doesn't matter. But this kind of fantasy, is what a lot of the characters in this book are feeling. In this album. I'm calling it a book. The New Sound is kind of a book. I'm telling you, it's kind of a musical. It's this one story of the same... the term that Geordie Greep used was yearning, which I think is a very kind way to put it. These small men who want to feel big, and the main way they want to feel big is through some kind of sexual conquest, and they can't find that sexual conquest with women in nature, so instead they find women through prostitution. It's the dream of the happy prostitute, the happy John, being able to jump over this feeling of inadequacy through some kind of like cheat code, sort of like the way that incels use, pickup technology, pickup lines and sort of psychology to try to get over. Like there has to be some way to get around this. But I'm not done. There's one last composite. There's one last link in this Legend of Zelda Horny Edition that I need to talk about. Why do I think this album is so great in describing these themes? Because I think Geordie Greep has felt these feelings and he's describing his own feelings. Why am I hope, good at describing them? Because it was me. I was one of these guys. That's me at 16 years old, okay? That sexy son of a bitch is right there. Okay, look at him, wearing a Rod Serling t-shirt, eating oxtail at TT the Bears in Boston, Massachusetts, okay? Look at that guy right there, okay? You think that guy was having a lot of success with the ladies? I hate to tell you, he wasn't. I didn't have a girlfriend in high school. I didn't know how to talk to them. Seriously, I went on one, I didn't know it was a date. It turns out it was a date, and I was making weird jokes about knee pads and mayonnaise. True story. I didn't understand the joke. Someone told me the joke, but I told the joke, and she understood the joke, and she was not psyched about it. I didn't know what to do. I was a Robert E. Crumb. I was a courtly love kind of guy, thinking I just had to be the most perfect guy ever, and then I could possibly get the favor of a woman. Not understanding that you just start off by treating people like human beings, and then everything will flow from there, but that's fine. I didn't understand that. So I relate to it. I relate to it on a personal level. I'd never really talked about this before, but I remember very clearly when I was 13, 14 years old, seeing this poster, an ad for it in a magazine, must have been Entertainment Weekly, and I get sad when I see this image because I remember looking at Julia Roberts' butt. I do, very specifically, and it must have been Photoshopped, by the way. I don't think it's real, but it didn't matter to me back then, and just that feeling. That the teenage sex urge being so powerful and so focused on just that, and just feeling like I would never know whatever I thought the joy would be to be with someone, or, like it completely dominated my thinking. And I think this album is for me. It's for me then. This dude would have loved this album, and this dude would have related to this album, and this album might have helped this dude get out of the spot that he was in at that time. But even if we go a couple years later, I went to Germany. And after I had this job where I worked in France, and I drove around Germany with this woman. I was in love with her. She was pretty. We drove around. I offered to pay for everything. She never indicated romantic interest. I didn't care. I played it cool. I dropped her off where she was going at an army base where her uncle worked. And it was one of the worst weeks of my life. Because I was just like, it turns out, as you kids would say, simping. I thought if I was nice enough, if I was cool enough, if I was fun enough, I was telling her all about all these things about Germany that I knew, all these things, but she didn't care. She kept on talking about some dude that she was into who wasn't into her. It was like I was in a online forum about how women are wrong and how I was being a beta and how I needed to stop simping, all that stuff. At the end of the trip, I took a cargo ship from Hamburg to Montreal. I was so afraid of flying, I took a boat. Whole nother story. And so when I was in Hamburg, there I am, okay? I'm in Hamburg and I'm walking around. Hamburg's a very horny city. And there's a street, Hermannstrasse, which is filled with prostitutes. You go through these gates and then you see a place like this. And behind those windows are all women who are just sitting there ready to be paid for sex. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I came that close. I didn't come that close. I'm lucky enough to have a very, very, very strong moral compass that even though I have a lot of problems with my parents, they instilled that compass in me quite well. So I really appreciate that. But it's as close as I ever got. It's not that I wasn't thinking about it. I felt so ugly. I had been in France 2 years before, and all the ladies wanted me. And then I came back to America for a year, and I quit smoking. And instead of smoking, I started eating more hot dogs. And so I gained like 30 pounds. And I went back to France, and everyone told me I was fat, and none of the women wanted me. I just felt so ugly. And then I'm driving around with this woman, and I want her to want me, but she wants this other dude. And I keep paying for her stuff, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how smart and charming I am. It doesn't matter. She doesn't want to kiss me. All right? And then here I am on this street. This album, to me, puts me right back on this street. True story. So I never knocked or anything. I didn't get any money. I didn't get that far ideating. I almost told the story as though I came close. I didn't really come that close. But I understood the feeling better than I ever would feel. And it was raining. And at the end of the street, a whole bunch of prostitutes were underneath umbrellas, and they were trying to seduce me, trying to get me in, and they wouldn't let me get through. And I had to basically just bust my way through. I had to just no, I don't want it. I had to run through. It was super harrowing. So there's my little story about the yearning hero that is at the center of this album. And I think it has a lot to do with this album cover as well. So let's talk about the album cover. Let me check my baby monitor as I've talked for 40 minutes without even talking about the music yet. She's in the same place, still asleep. Good stuff. I think this is very tied into those themes, because I think what this is, this is the Greep character, this is the bongo, this is the incel Andy, this is the Professor Sky at 14 years old looking at the Julia Roberts butt in a commercial for Pretty Woman, or him on the Herbertstrasse. And this, I think, is a prostitute. I think that's supposed to represent, and I think this is, the sex act, and he's being killed while also being effed at the same time. And he has this sort of joy and happiness. There's a real sense of happiness and of destruction, and this feels very much like a Robert Crumb thing. Like the sex act is something so complicated and so mysterious and possible to understand, and it's violent and it makes you feel bad. And then I think this is supposed to represent, a schoolgirl, supposed to represent a respectable woman, the kind of woman who he would be with if he was more adjusted and he knew how to talk to people. And she's literally being covered by this. Now, okay, hey, you're watching a thing by a professor. A professor goes through grad school. When you go through grad school, you learn everything's about castration, okay? You learn everything is about getting your wing chopped off. I think this is a symbolic chopping off of a wing, okay, of a penis. I think that's part of what we see here. I think the blood is blood. I also think the blood is supposed to be ejaculate. And I think it's sort of like humiliating this good woman who is so evil as to not give him attention that he needs to go to a prostitute who will simultaneously F him and kill him at the same time. Sorry, my hands are very cold out here, so it's hard for me to hold things. So that's my theory on the album cover and how it all ties together. And if I haven't earned your like yet, huh? Have you smashed that like bucket? Have you subscribed? I told you some very personal stories. The Herbertstrasse story. It's funny thing is that's in the Reeperbahn in Hamburg, and turns out Geordie Greep just played in the Reeperbahn. So that's pretty cool. Smash the like button. If you want to tell me you like the video, in the comments you put AVAA. That stands for awesome video as always, and I will always heart those comments. So let's actually get to a review of the album, shall we? Starts off with the track Blues. The next song, okay. Blues is just a great example of sort of tying, I think, bringing people in who liked Black MIDI into this new world. It's more traditional with its kind of mathy precision, stop and start crunchiness. And right off the bat, we had this image of this guy, Incel Andy, the protagonist of many generations, many different forms of the same yearning, pre-internet incel with these sexual urges and the desire to feel big. And he talks about this person who writes in sonnets. Is it clear this is before internet? He talks about this person as being a blowhard. This is my favorite description. Do you know what I mean is your favorite turn of phrase. You know what I mean is the second favorite turn of phrase. Do you know what I mean and you know what I mean are ways of filling up a space. Are ways of talking without saying anything. This is somebody who needs to feel big, and they often feel big with their mastery of words and their mastery of speech. And so whenever things get dry and there's nothing to say, they say, do you know what I mean? 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 To make sure that they are still the director of the conversation. And then basically the thesis of the album, you can speak English better than anyone, and you can curse like no one has ever done, and you have a bigger dick than any man has ever lived, and you can come more than 100 stallions. That's the dream. That's the power fantasy, the power trip of Incel Andy. That's how he feels about himself because he feels the opposite at the same time. He's a really great lyricist, by the way. You put your left hand under your jacket and pretend you're Napoleon. You squeeze your... you put your right hand in your pocket and you pretend you have a gun. Interesting idea of like trying to feel bigger. Of course, Napoleon is famous for... Napoleon is kind of one of these guys too, especially if you see the new Ridley Scott movie, which is better than people think. He's sort of an incel Andy as well, a sort of pre-internet incel, especially the way that he is towards his wife. At least, I'm not sure if that's the way he was in real life, but it's actually not that far apart. All these great little jazzy bits over this fourth chorus, and there's this like drum solo. It's like, what the hell? Is this a drum solo? Oh no, that was just a fill. And then this whole final verse where the bass in the beginning was do 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 do, and now it's horns going do 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 do, and then it ends with a great big existentialist thing. Soon you'll disappear, and that's the only fact. It ends up being this existential truth. It doesn't matter what a big man you are. It doesn't matter how much you did, how much you do. Right? Frank Zappa's dead. Doesn't matter how great he is, how much he did, how powerful he is. He's dead, so he's not actually a big man. None of us are big men. There's no such thing as a big man because we're all going to be erased by death. Next track is called Terra. This is the first of the Brazil tracks, actually recorded and played by Brazilians, which makes sense because there's more kind of Latin rhythms, sort of African-y Latin rhythms, which makes sense. Crazy tambourine work here. I love the way it gets sweet at the end of the second verse as he's describing the Museum of Human Suffering. And what's great is he describes this whole thing, and you sort of think, oh, maybe this is away from Sky's central thesis. Maybe this is away from the basic idea of this yearning man who wants to feel big and not small. And then it ends with, or it has in the middle, dig up my corpse, shake his hand, tell yourself he was a great man. So the previous song told us that the only thing that is true is death. And then this song tells us that what happens after you die. If you do enough great things, then you will be remembered in some way. I assume that's why he says terra, because that means earth, and so I assume it's like he's being dug up. I'm not quite tell. And then at the end, we had this whole like, ooh, and this is that edge of cheesy thing. The edge of cheesy is so important in this album that he goes right up to it. He lets out this kind of crazy yell, and it's funny because I was driving to Fairport to a hedge maze with my daughter, and my 2-year-old was in the back and my 16-year-old was in the front. And my 2-year-old has started, like, at a certain point, developmentally it makes sense, but they start shrieking just for no reason, just ah, and it's really unpleasant. And so we're telling her not to. And then in this song, he goes ah, and then my 2-year-old started and said, well, we can't do anything about it, It also has that cool little donkey percussion. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I don't know what that thing is. I love that thing. Then we get to Holy Holy. I did a whole video about Holy Holy, so I'm not going to get into it, except to say my prediction about what the entire album was about ended up being correct, because Holy Holy is the perfect distillation of the themes of this album. Somebody who wants to seem bigger than he is, somebody who feels very small, somebody who doesn't know how to relate to women, somebody who uses prostitution to make up for that feeling, that lack, that feeling of inadequacy. And it's so beautifully connected. You could do a whole study of Courtly Love and Geordie Greep. I'm not going to do it now, but you really could, because all these characters are just so lost in that kind of romantic ideal of a impossible love that's from far away and valorousness. It's man. What sucks is that, like, men really do deserve care. Men do need to be healed, but it's not because women are so bad. It's because the systems of patriarchy were so effective that they ended up enslaving us as well. Anyways, it's all too bad. So Incel Andy visits a prostitute. The cool thing is, so my 2-year-old loves music, and and she was singing holy holy holy, because she remembers when I listened to it before. So, hey, this is my 2-year-old's favorite Geordie Greep song. And then we get to the most important song of the album, The New Sound. What? Sky, this is an instrumental. How can this be the most important song? It's not even called something weird. It's not even about Incel Andy, pre-internet Incel Andy. Why are you saying this is the most important? Well, it goes back to the My Song theory, okay? I'm going to read to you how Geordie Greep described the title track on My Song, and see if it does not apply perfectly to the title track, The New Sound. Really, every track is brilliant, but in particular, the title song, My Song. There's a moment where the band starts playing and he does his own sort of piano solo, almost like a cadenza. And the way he is playing is just absolutely beautiful. That's why, because this is the thing. I think this album's important. I think all the words are important. I think they're super important. I think he's making a fascinating set of lyrics and all that. But really, I think what he wants is this new sound. What it seems to me is that he would be just as happy if this album were instrumental, but he knows that we're not going to listen to it if it's instrumental, or not as many of us will listen to it as instrumental. So he puts on this whole superstructure of lyrics. So you have this amazing African-style guitar with bongos and fast-played chords and dissolved into some kind of Latin style, little Woody Woodpecker jazz trills. This organ joins in the back like an angel choir, and this hard-as-nail guitar runs with these drums and the piano, and then more of these drums and these extended flying sounds. It's almost triumphant. Like, Peaches and Regalia from the live version from 1971, It's just like, has this pause and this breakdown, this funky wah-wah sound, and it builds back up, and this just madness with his voice howling in the background, which, by the way, Keith Jarrett was very famous for howling when he would play, because he would just just gets so into it. He just, even though he's making instrumental music, you'd hear him go, you know, a little bit of acoustic guitar, a quiet bit with no drums, then all strings together, these bongos in the back, and this weird choir of hard to place sounds, and this insane chugga guitar ending. This is his new sound. This is him telling, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. So even though I think we could call this album the Ballad of Incel Andy and all that, I think we could think of it as an instrumental. I think going back, you know, going back to Zappa, going back to a lot of great musicians, like, he knows. It's like Zappa, I think, would have been just as happy if all of his music was instrumental. I think he would have been. And I think when he thought of things to say, he just sort of thought of things to say, and a lot of it was weird and horny, some of it was satirical and fascinating, but he was constantly pushing music into new areas, finding new musicians to work with, and that was the whole point. And to a certain extent, the singing was this afterthought that just made sure that people would listen to it. So that's why I think this album is called The New Sound, and why it's not called, you know, simping for hoes, Big Simpin'. That's what the album should be called. It should be called Big Simpin', okay? But it's not. It's called The New Sound, because all that stuff I talked to you about for 20 minutes with the Reaperstrasse and all that stuff, or Herbertstrasse, all that, nah. It's about the new sound. It's about this music. Oh, do it. Listen. Damn it, I don't give homework very often, but this is your homework. Listen to The New Sound. Make a little playlist, would you? 2 songs. The New Sound by Geordie Greep and My Song by Keith Jarrett. Listen to them back to back. See if you don't feel it. See if you don't see where Geordie's going. You know, he might be losing you. He might be going off into a direction that isn't quite as what you wanted as Black Midi was. And I don't blame you. I love Black Midi too. But if he's not going somewhere interesting and cool, if you don't hear it in The New Sound. I don't even have to talk about who is. Next song is called Walk Up, and I have to talk about who is. So, you know, this great kind of thump bass guitar, and he does this thing sometimes where the rhythm will invert, so like goo ga goo ga ga goo ga goo. Oh, it makes you so uncomfortable. It's almost like a 70s TV show. I mean, would you like to see an image of this song? Walk Up. It's how I felt. It's how I felt when I was walking down the street. Now listen. I did not turn my body. My body remained perpendicular to the end of the street. If it ever went parallel, that would have been a bad sign, because then I would have been actually interacting and thinking about going into one of those doors, and I never seriously thought about it. But this is a song about what happens when you do turn parallel to the end of the street. When you do walk into one of these doors. When you do walk up. Walk up to failure, walk up to regret. The failure that's implied in prostitution. But why do I like this song so much? Because actually it's not even necessarily just about that. It then gets to be about a businessman who's like feeling, you still smell her snatch as you trawl through accounts, flip through the company books, you say you rode the coattails of blind chance, you know the itch for romance, another lonely executive cunt, and all the, what's that lump on your balls, all that stuff. So like, even a man who seems like he might be sort of a big man, a sort of a big executive man, is still here paying for love on his lunch break. So much of this album is about prostitution and about the feelings that go into it. And then there's this amazing scene at the end where he's like walking around with someone else and sees one of the prostitutes he's with, and he sort of acts like he doesn't know who she is. And, you know, I think we're supposed to feel sympathy for them. Even though they're unlikable characters, I think we're supposed to. And I know I feel sympathy for them because I used to feel like them. Again, moral compass meant that I was basically safe, and, you know, I was raised a feminist, so it was really hard for me to really go down the dark side of a lot of these feelings. But the incongruity of it's hard. It's hard being a young man. I see all these young men, and they don't know what to do. And the second half of the song is a skit. And I'm an American, and I'm pissed at the song. He's using a caricature of an American accent. We don't all talk like that, you know? We don't all talk like Texans and say fuck you all the time. And frankly, I think we should cancel Geordie Greep because he's anti-American, and I don't like it. Mostly joking. But it's this like fake country song, very playful. I ain't got a home, got no town, ain't got no friends, ain't got a frown. I'm unhappy and that's the truth. I got 2 words, fuck you. This seems like it's a goof, but it's not. It's not a goof because I think it's actually from the perspective of this businessman. I think this is the thing. I'm unhappy and that's the truth. I'm unhappy and that's the truth. That's the truth of so many of these people. So many of these people, so many powerful people, so many big men. So many big men who become big by trying not to feel small are just unhappy. And those are the 2 words. That's how they feel. It's sad. Sorry, I'm just looking through my notes. I have a lot of notes. Then we get to the song Through a War, kind of a Brazilian tune here. Wow, we're almost at the 55-minute mark, and my baby is still asleep. Have you given a thumbs up yet for the very fact that she has not woken up? Nope, she's rolling. Okay, when she stands up, that's when I gotta stop the video. I'll keep an eye on it. Through a War, Brazilian. Brazilian sounds. This horn announces everything. It sounds militaristic. This breezy song with these Latin rhythms, it's just so gorgeous. I have to say, this was the song that made my daughter castrate a 90-year-old man with a spork and French kiss a donkey. This whole, like, I disembowel myself just to hold your hand. Now, this song is complicated, and I wanted to try to figure it out. And in order to figure it out, I want to tell you a story. About colonies. Because a lot of colonizing sometimes is about feeling small. I want to tell you about a town in Namibia called Marienthal. Now, Marienthal is not a particularly important city in world history, but there's a little anecdote about its name. First of all, to understand why would a place have the word Marie in it in Namibia, because of course Namibia was colonized. It was colonized by the Germans. And did you know, not only are the Germans responsible for the most famous genocide of the 20th century, but also the first? It's true. The first genocide of the 20th century was in Namibia, and it was the Germans who killed 10,000 Nama and 65,000 Herero in their efforts to colonize Namibia. Marienthal is named after the first settler, the first colonist from Germany who arrived in Namibia. Named after his wife. Okay? There's a lot of places like that on planet Earth where conquerors, colonizers, despots take over a space, enslave people, put people down, in jail them, all these things. And then they show their greatness by naming things after their wife and not after themselves. What is the truth? It's actually after themselves. So this whole song is about this conquering man who conquers in the name of this woman. I conquered every village in the land. I put them into ranks. I made them build a castle for me and a big statue in the square. I made them carve my name on every piece of gold. I made them carve yours everywhere on every tree and every train. And he just goes on and on. This is the other thing about like courtly love and about all these things that I'm not saying Courtney love, I'm saying courtly love, okay? I'm not talking about I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the old concepts that are amazingly persistent in modern society. That like it's never about the woman. If you read a great poet, a great love poem, it's not about the woman. It's never about her. It's always about the artist. Anybody who conquers and gives what they conquer a name other than their own is only doing it to show how great they are. It's only ever about them. This is sort of the deeper truth about all of this desire for sexual conquest. Okay, some of it is about sexual desire, but it's really about power. It's really about feeling big and not feeling small. So that's why the song, which ostensibly is about dedicating this mythical link, right? So this is not the 20th century, or this is probably the 16th century or late 18th century, okay? Some colonizer, then he just gets into this whole power fantasy. Have you ever seen a man beg for his life? Have you ever seen that kind of fear? Seen a man boiled alive and these jazzy guitar solos? And it's colonizer incel. It's what it is. Jeez, a little Philip Glassy interlude with its arpeggiated sounds. this great rhythm, this da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and more talk about STDs. It's back-to-back songs about STDs, but he loves it because it turns out maybe he doesn't even really know this woman. It turns out maybe this woman was just a prostitute, actually, I think this is just a memory of a woman who he slept with once who was a prostitute. So much of that last album, Hellfire, was about prostitutes as well. It's a very important figure, but not for the woman, for the way that the man feels about that woman. Then we get to Bongo Season. Oh my God. What a beautiful song. Isn't that new sound that we're talking about? Just this crazy percussion that forms over time. The lyrics are the most oblique. Two mice, harikiri, in the corner of my room. Their little paunches bleeding. The tails are interlinked. An orchestra plays through the floorboards. He says hello as they say goodbye. So yeah, harikiri is like a way of killing yourself in sort of Japanese tradition of like cutting through your stomach. In general, the cover of the album is sort of a Japanese image. I think a lot of these feelings that we talk about, the sort of incel, simping, feudal conception of love, feeling small, wanting to feel big, a lot of that's reflected in a lot of Japanese culture as well. So I think it kind of makes sense. It all kind of makes sense. A lot of it's sort of in sort of anime and hentai and all that kind of stuff. All that a culture that is very good at depicting the sort of Robert Crumb-ish depravity and inability to relate to women, and through extravagantly drawn and conceived of sexual situations. I also don't wonder if it's not... There's a movie from the 70s by Oshima called Realm of the Senses, Empire of the Senses, if you're French, which is this, whoa, man, what an awesome movie. It's about a prostitute and a guy, and they have a lot of sex, and the sex is not simulated. They have the sex on... It's sex. It's not porn, but it's kind of porn. And it ends in a very... I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, but it ends in a very sort of grotesque way. That this makes me feel like he is watching... what was that Jim Carrey movie about the stuffed mice? Dinner for Schmucks, yeah. Kind of like a... sort of like imagining mice performing Realm of the Senses on his floorboard. But just the music's so beautiful. I swear to God, I swear to God, this man listens to the Grateful Dead. Don't you ever tell anybody, because it's not cool to listen to the Grateful Dead. It's not cool. But he sounds so much like Jerry Garcia on here, and just the soundscape here. Then we get to Motorbike with Seth Evans, who's like the other dude in this whole thing. He's part of Ham Limited, HMLTD, Hamilton. However we want to say their name. I forget. I think it's Ham Limited. I think that's the way they say it. Or I said that as a joke, and now I think it's the truth. Apologies go to whoever pleases. But Seth Evans is the producer on this whole album, so he gets to sing. I wonder why. I think maybe it's because this is still connected to the central theme of the album. This guy is very much a link in the link of protagonists that go across this whole album, but he's in a very different stage because he's leaving his wife. So like, when if you ever end up being middle-aged, I hope you do. Most of you are probably young. I try to tell you this all the time. I'm not sponsored by anybody, but I will tell you this. If you are very, very sad and you think that life sucks, it might. But if you get older, it gets better. Just take care of your brain, see a therapist, and you'll, by the time you're 40, you should have your stuff figured out and you'll be a happy person. So that's my general theory. But when you're 40 years old, when you're in your 40s, you meet a lot of dudes. Man, most dudes aren't happy. Most women aren't happy either. Most people, like the people who didn't like take care of their brain and go to therapy. You know what I'm saying? Like I know, my friends who are in their 40s, I know them. Like they're cool, they're all set. But there's certain dudes you meet where they're just like at the edge of just falling apart, trying to figure out what makes a man a man. And they have a thing like this song, which is basically a midlife crisis, about a guy who leaves his family because he wants a Yamaha motorbike and he wants to ride, and that's all he needs. And again, it goes back to the same theme of feeling small. The children stop their play, housewives stop work to watch just to see me riding away to catch a glimpse of my brand new VMAX engine. One more side note. on a musician who I think ties into this very well. Pete Townsend. Now, Pete Townsend, very complicated figure. But if you take an album like Quadrophenia, or even stuff before them, he's obsessed with the male sex urge. He's obsessed with feeling small. He's obsessed with objects that make men feel big. You know, like I've got a Gibson without a case, or I've got a motor scooter, or I've got a tattoo, or, you know, like he was very ahead of his time, I think, in identifying the way the consumer culture taps into men's desire to feel bigger. If you never listened to Who Sell Out, that's a really good example of that. And even just the kind of psychosexual nature of a song like Substitute by Pete Townsend. You know, I substitute you for my mom, at least I get my washing done. Just like, wow, man, dude, crazy stuff. That's how I feel with this, the way he shouts out the VMAX engine. It feels like he's very kind of connected to that Pete, that I could have included Pete Townsend in that little slideshow, but there are other more complicating aspects of that particular story. And then there's just this amazing part. I gotta say, I wasn't happy to hear a different singer, but I think it's necessary, but I didn't want it. Does that make sense? It's also kind of funny because it's like, you know, there's some songs in the Black Midi albums that are sung by Cameron Picton, and it's like, you know, like another singer. Like, so, you know, it really is like, it's not that he has to be the only voice. It's just that he wanted different voices. I don't know. But there's this great bit with this four note segment where two notes are the same. And this is just the thing. You know, you get musicians around who can jam, who can play with you. And then you think it's just like a little throwaway line, but then it becomes almost like polyrhythm, and all these jazz horns come in, and it starts like modulating, and then there's this like absolute madness of xylophone and guitar playing totally in sync, note for 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 note. Zappa, this droning madness. Whew, it's great. And then we get to the best song on the album, As If Waltz, again with the Brazil folks. Hey, he's having fun, everybody. The song's called Waltz, and it's the most not waltz beginning. The snares on the 2 and the 4. Weird sound. Again, at the edge of cheesy. And this whole song, this is Pretty Woman. This is the dream of Pretty Woman as told by a little man, not a big man like Richard Gere. Because the truth is, Richard Gere in that movie doesn't exist. That guy doesn't exist. It's the dream of falling in love with a prostitute. Have you ever seen the comedy of Jim Norton as well? It turned out to be kind of a right-wing dude, so he's a little bit of a bummer now. But he, probably more than any other comedian, goes really deep into a lot of the feelings that you have with sex workers and with sort of sexual depravity. This feels like a very Jim Norton-y style song, but again, he ended up becoming sort of one of those like, you can't cancel me, guys. That sucks. But it's this fantasy. I want to take you dancing, to get married, to see you with regular clothes, to earn you, to love you, to look at your face and feel no shame, to have no ounce of pity. This is really that feeling. You know, what do? You have the sex urge, so you don't know what to do. You don't know how to talk to people, and you feel so small. And then you get the prostitute, and you just want the good feeling. You want the love. You know, I remember what I felt like on Herbertstrasse. I remember how I felt at 16. I remember. That's part of the reason why I'm a happy dude now. Freezing his hands off on his back porch while his daughter rolls around like she's caught by some kind of invisible crocodile. But like, I'm so happy because I remember those feelings, and I now have those feelings. I have all these feelings of love and connection, right? That you want, but when you're young and when you feel like a loser, you don't know how to do it. So it's this beautiful idea, only an hour, because that's how much he paid for. And then the waltz starts, and this little string quartet and the guitar notes, to see you without your makeup on, to see you cry in sleep, to hide in your closet and see you at work, to see if the rest are like me. He's fascinated about whether or not he's just a normal John, or a John is a term for someone who uses a prostitute. And then the dark truth just goes on more and more. To hear you sing in the shower, to take you abroad, to meet your parents, to see your home, to show you my family, take you to see my favorite films, to see what you think of Proust. Did you have to say Proust, Geordie? Did you? You taking a shot at me? It's at me, isn't it? Isn't it? You saw my video on Frank Ocean and Proust. Check it out. I'll include a link to it at the end of the video. One of my best videos. I do a whole study of Blonde through Proust. But anyway, obviously it's not about me, but this is about me because this is how I felt. This is how... This is entirely... I don't think I've ever told this story before. So, I got my first girlfriend in freshman in college. Okay, so went through high school and took a year off, and then I was a freshman in college. Okay, before then, there was this woman who needed a ride back to Boston. I went to college, a place called Wheaton, 40 minutes outside of Boston, and she needed a ride into Boston, and so I big simping. I was simping. The term didn't exist at the time, but I was like, gee, yeah, sure. And I remember driving back, and she was Japanese, and I remember talking to her about the films of Akira Kurosawa and why I liked Kagebusha more than even the Seven Samurai. And she didn't care about Kurosawa, guy. She wasn't impressed by your knowledge. She didn't care. She just wanted a ride, you prick, you asshole. Anyways, there's this thing that happens when you are... Because the thing is, a lot of these little men, I'm talking about the little man inside me as well, a lot of these little men do a lot of interesting stuff and have a lot of interesting thoughts and do a lot of work. And it's not just to feel big, it's because, human beings are great. Even little men are great people, they can be. So, I learned a lot about cinema. And I have learned a lot about Proust, I was on, after my divorce, I was on dating apps, I was trying to figure out how do I weave Proust into the conversation? How do I talk about my favorite films? But this is the thing, he's projecting this desire, this feeling that he has turned himself into a big man and is not a tiny man. And I want to watch you fuck other men. Oh, because this the other thing, it's still tied into this humiliation that he feels, and he's eroticizing the humiliation, which is what cuckoldry is about. It's eroticizing humiliation. And oh my God, to see you naked and leave you alone, to help you in any way that I can. This is where it becomes very paternalistic, very condescending, to give you whatever you need, to put you through school, to get a job, to bribe professors and police. This is that dream. This is the movie Pretty Woman. This is the entire movie. Okay? Get the Roy Orbison song out of the way. Bum, 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 bum. Instead, replace it with this little waltz. And the strings get so gorgeous and heartbreaking. I want, please, in the event that anybody watching this is in the Greeposphere, can we get the instrumental version of the album? I want to hear it. Oh, I want to hear it. Because you can't help but focus on the lyrics, because he's a great singer and he's a great lyricist. He's actually doing an amazing job of describing all these things I'm talking about. So I'm glad that the lyrics exist, but at the same time, it makes me sad because the little romantic strings that come in here, And to pretend to be I met you anywhere but here, to pretend I don't have to say, all I have to say to you is how much, and it just goes on like this, and this totally new part plays this little ditty on a cello that gets matched by this vibraphone, and then a guitar, and then a harpsichord. I want the instrumental versions, okay? Oh my God. Matter of fact, I think if I had the instrumental version, I'd listen to it more than the not instrumental version, because I don't know how much I want to hear, come like a bucket of stallions, all that stuff, but the music's just so good. Then we get to The Magician, the penultimate song, which means second to last. It doesn't mean the best. Speaking of which, do I get to talk about it? Oh yeah, I think she fell back asleep. This is good. This is the longest video I've ever done on my porch, by the way. You can get my mug. Shit, I'm so bad at advertising myself. You can get my mug. But if I had to choose between you getting my mug and you leaving a comment, I'd probably go with comment, because you're more likely to do it. The Magician. So this is kind of great kind of sweeping guitar lines up and down, almost sort of like Harvest Moon era Neil Young, kind of nice sort of country thing here. Geordie Greep is a great consumer of genres. And the thing that's important is that I believe it. I believe that when he says he listens to the salsa music, that he loves it. I also watched the What's in the Bag, the Amoeba series. That's great. Amoeba Records is a record chain in California, with the exception with the exception of Record Archive in Rochester, New York, the Amoeba record stores, or maybe the best record stores in the country. They ask them, what music are they buying? And it's really fun because, Morgan Simpson, the drummer, is just like Earth, Wind, and Fire and all this great music. And Cameron Picton is like getting a lot more sort of like stuff that makes sense with his style of music that's, like maybe not as much my thing, but interesting all the same. And then you have Geordie, and he's picking out like this salsa music, and he's picking out Willie Nelson. Like, you get the sense he really does like live it and breathe it. He just wants to just music all the time. All these great weird similes, like the man who pays his wife £200 to have sex because it's the only way he can come. More about like, I feel almost like this is like what happens when those little men get married, like after they felt so little, like how do they still connect to it? How do that, like that shame, it's kind of tied into this sort of cuckoldry thing as well, the sort of like eroticization of shame. Like the girl born a princess too early, too late, and will never be queen. There seems to be the most sort of real human emotion in this song. I mean, there's human emotion in the rest of it in music, but the lyrics are fairly abstract, right? They're fairly abstract about sort of ideas. I think they have power because I feel like he's able to access the reality of these emotions and these feelings the same way I am trying to by telling you over and over again about the goddamn Herbertstrasse. But this feels maybe a little bit closer to him, this beautiful image of a chimp given a pen who draws the bars of its cage. And it's like a 12-minute song. It's beautiful and expansive. And there's this whole part about imagining the German Black Forest. And this is where I really get into the courtly love phase, because often courtly love will happen where, be a knight on a horse and we'll see a woman far, far, far away. And just he knows nothing about the German Black Forest. He keeps saying it over and over again. And just like this imagery, this romanticism, because that's the other problem. Oh, God, I know I'm an hour and 60 minutes in, but you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound, okay? Romanticism is at the heart of a lot of this. By romanticism, I mean people who live their life like it's in a novel, people who think of life in a sort of sweeping romantic way, who don't love humanity, don't love reality, but love ideas and love feelings. And that's very connected to the way this person is singing about this woman. And it's a very hard way to live because you end up not having real human connections. Is it just me, or does he sing a little bit like Charlie Day, kind of Nightman style? I ruined the song for you. Just one little part, a little bit before the bombastic guitar drum. I could easily imagine Charlie Day singing this. Also, I think that Geordie Greep has kind of I think this whole album has a kind of Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia feeling. I think he could be right there as well. The sweet opening melody comes back and then it has this pulsing jam. Just such great musicianship. We finally arrive at the end of the album, If You Are But a Dream. I reviewed this song the first time and I said, wow, this sounds like an old jazz standard. How did he do such a good job of writing what sounds like a lost American standard? That's a fascinating idea. And then I looked at the credits and it's a Frank Sinatra song. So there you go. Of course it's a Frank Sinatra song, because he's very clearly fascinated by Frank Sinatra. Now, he talked about this in the New Music Express. The original Pitchfork. I'm just kidding. New Music Express is awesome. So is Pitchfork sometimes. So he wrote about this song, and I really want to focus on what he said about this. This yearning figure, I've always been really attracted to it. Even with this last song of the album, it's a cover. I love the mood of the song and the lyrics of the song, the fleetingness and this thing which you can't quite get to. It's interesting. It wasn't necessarily a conscious through line or an overarching narrative. It's more like if you're going to explore something seriously, you might as well go for it. This yearning figure is what he calls Incel Andy, what I've been calling Incel Andy, going back to Courtly Love and Van Gogh and Robert Crumb. But what's fascinating is that it's a cover of a Frank effing Sinatra song. The King Lothario, the sexiest, most slept with 10,000 women like that this is true. Frank Sinatra slept with 10,000 women a week. It's true. And what's wild is that in the context of this album, this great classic song, I think 1941 maybe, by Frank Sinatra gets recontextualized and becomes an Incel Andy song. If you are but a dream, I don't want to wake up, and I don't want to feel bereaved, and I don't, like, he doesn't know this woman. Like, it's, she is a dream to him. Like, he wants to be with her, but also he doesn't really know her. This song is an Incel Andy song. It's that courtly love. It's the truth behind it. It's the internal, this song is a societally approved way of expressing the societally disapproved feelings that went into this whole album. This album has been about the self-loathing, the dirty truth underneath this glossy lie of this song, of this cover. Really, I think that's what it is. I think that's why he picked the song, and he says he didn't do it intentionally. You know, I think he's doing more than what Harry Nilsson did when Harry Nilsson did an album of standards. If you don't know this, by the way, it's awesome. Touch of Schmelson in the Night. I think he's doing more than that. I really think he's showing you that even the big man is Incel Andy's small man. Also, I think it's important that the album begins with the most black MIDI sounding song. You know, that whole thing. And then it ends with just a torch song. Ends with a crooner just singing this song, this old song, because I think it's taking you from the old sound and then to this old sound, but then it's the new sound. Interestingly, the song, I did recognize it from somewhere eventually because it was in the movie Radio Days by Woody Allen. I could have put him in the slides, couldn't I? Is he not also a great example of someone who's capable of expressing the feelings of being a small man and not knowing how to relate to women? As far as a closing note goes, in the New Music Express, he said this is the first time he felt transparent about the kind of music he listens to, and we hear that all the way through. And when he and to return to the Keith Jarrett quote, this is what he said in closing about my song, and this is how I'm going to close my thoughts on the new sound. He is a monster of music who is not afraid to play really melodic music. It's not like he's saying, okay, you know what, I could play anything from any which way, so I'm only going to play avant-garde, bizarre stuff, or really exploratory, improvisationary stuff. I can also play these tunes that are really melodic, that like anyone would like. He's constantly pushing himself. It's a great album that's thrilling from the first note to the last, and every time I listen to it, I like it more. So that is a 10 album, I think. Ladies and gentlemen, Geordie Greep is describing exactly how I feel about his album, and he is projecting how you want to feel. Every time I listen to the new sound, I like it more. It's thrilling from the beginning. I think I'm going to title this video A Zero Makes a 10, because a lot of this is about the feeling of being a zero. You know what I mean? About feeling like you're nothing. You're like a little tiny man, little tiny zero man. And I think this is like if a zero can make a 10. I want to thank my Patreons who give me the money to buy albums. I'm going to buy this album. I'm going to buy the instrumental version of the album, which I am trying to will into existence. Maybe it already exists. I don't know. So these are my Patreons. They help me out. I also give them a chance for a shout out, which I'll get to in a second. So, yeah. I mean, look at all these Patreons. You can join over there too. / Professor Sky on Patreon. That'd be pretty cool. Because I also buy diapers. Like, within probably 4 minutes of me hitting stop on this video, I will be changing a diaper. So they help me with that. So here are the shout outs. Wyatt Potter says, I love this guy's anachronistic nature. I think that's an important thing I didn't really get into. I also got a message from someone I met in DC once on Instagram. I forget his name. I apologize. He was sort of talking about the anachronistic, like how this album is sort of out of time and doesn't really have a place. Yeah, I do like that. Pato wanted a shout out. Harlan T, Zach, Super Cami, Nupt. And Nupt has a sister who saw Geordie Greep perform in Cardiff, which is in Wales. Jack McConnell, Caden XCX, Hunter Tice, and Nick Shrestha just got it in at the very end. I'm now going to see, is my daughter doing cartwheels in her crib? Nah, she's cool. She's playing with her stuffed animal. It's a little rabbit called Zeka, Z-E-K-A. That's the Serbian word for rabbit. You've now learned something from this video. Until next time, there's the camera.